Good morning. In this video, I explain who wanted Jesus Christ killed and why. I also explain why there was a plot to kill Jesus Christ. We began in John chapter 11 verses 47 through 53. Therefore the chief priests and the Pharisees convened a council and were saying, "What are we doing? For this man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, all men will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all, nor do you take into account that it is expedient for you that one man die for the people, and that the whole nation not perish." Now he did not say this of his own initiative, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus was going to die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but in order that he might also gather together into one the children of God who were scattered abroad. So from that day on, they planned together to kill him. So now we know who wanted Jesus Christ killed and why. The chief priests and the Pharisees were afraid the Romans would come and take away both their place and their nation. But what was their place? Let's turn to Matthew chapter 23, verses 1, 2, and 3 and find out. Then Jesus spoke to the crowd and his disciples, saying, "The scribes and the Pharisees have seated themselves in the chair of Moses. Therefore all they tell you, do and observe. But do not do according to their deeds, for they say things and do not do them." For the Pharisees had seated themselves in the chair of Moses. That was their place. But they had become corrupt, perverted, abusive. They had begun to use their position for their own personal gain. They had begun to corrupt and lead the people astray by their actions. Matthew chapter 23 tells how corrupt and hypocritical they were. But what about the nation they referred to? The nation did not belong to the chief priest or the high priest. The nation belonged to Jehovah God. God changed Jacob's name to Israel, and thus began the nation of Israel. God defined the borders of Israel, the promised land. God gave them the law which they must obey, the Ten Commandments. And they made a covenant with God, saying they would keep God's commandments and be obedient to his will. That was the covenant. He was their God and ruler. They were his people, the chosen people, the people he chose after the Gentiles to live in his kingdom, God's kingdom. So it was not their nation to begin with. It was God's kingdom. They just wanted to kill the rightful heir, Jesus Christ, and take the inheritance for themselves. What Caiaphas prophesied did not come to be. In fact, the exact opposite happened. 102 years after Jesus Christ was crucified, after the Bar Kokhba War, the nation of Israel was brought to an end. It ended just like God said it would end, and for the exact same reason God said it would end. The Jews who fought against Rome had their land confiscated, were put in chains and deported. Others left because of terror, famine, poverty. Judea was renamed Syria Palestina. Now let's understand why there was a plot to kill Jesus Christ. The chief priest, the high priest, the Pharisees, the elders, they were the leaders and rulers of the Jewish people. So why didn't they just take Jesus Christ out and stone him to death? I mean, they were the leaders of the Jewish people. The answer to that question is given in Matthew chapter 26, verses 3, 4, and 5. Then the chief priests and the elders of the people were gathered together in the court of the high priest named Caiaphas. And they plotted together to seize Jesus by stealth and kill him. But they were saying, not during the festival, otherwise a riot might occur among the people. So that also explains why they came for Jesus Christ in the middle of the night like a robber. Matthew chapter 26, verse 55. At that time, Jesus said to the crowd, "Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me, as you would against a robber? Every day I used to sit in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me." Now think about this. They did not seize Jesus Christ at a festival for fear of a riot. How much worse would the riot be had they taken Jesus Christ out and killed him? And who were the people, the chief priests, the high priests, and the Pharisees, were afraid would riot? It was not the Gentiles. It was about 3 years after Jesus Christ was crucified. before a Gentile accepted Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior. It was not the Christians. It was about 4 years after Jesus Christ was crucified that the disciples were first called Christians in the little town of Antioch. So who were the people the chief priests, the high priests, and the Pharisees were afraid would riot? They were the Jewish people, for the Jewish people believed Jesus Christ to be a prophet. And that is why they pressured and manipulated Pontius Pilate into handing Jesus Christ over to be crucified. Pilate knew that they had brought him before him because of envy. That fact is made clear in these verses. Matthew chapter 27, verses 17 and 18. So when the people gathered together, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew that because of envy, they had handed him over. Mark chapter 15, verses 9, 10, and 11. Pilate answered them, saying, "Do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews?" For he was aware that the chief priests had handed him over because of envy. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to ask him to release Barabbas for them instead. Now the four Gospels tells what happened to Jesus Christ when he was brought before Pilate. But the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of John gives information not contained in the other Gospels. So let's read from the Gospel of Luke. Luke chapter 23, verses 6 through 25. When Pilate heard it, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who himself also was in Jerusalem at that time. Now Herod was very glad when he saw Jesus, for he wanted to see him for a long time, because he had been hearing about him and was hoping to see some sign performed by him. And he questioned him at some length, but he answered him nothing. And the chief priests and the scribes were standing there accusing him vehemently. And Herod, with his soldiers, after treating him with contempt and mocking him, dressed him in a gorgeous robe and sent him back to Pilate. Now Herod and Pilate became friends with one another that very day, for before they had been enemies with each other. Pilate summoned the chief priests and the rulers of the people and said to them, "You brought this man to me as one who incites the people to rebellion. And behold, having examined him before you, I have found no guilt in this man regarding the charges which you make against him. No, nor has Herod, for he sent him back to us. And behold, nothing deserving death has been done by him." So what you have here is King Herod, a Jewish king who was more than likely appointed by the Romans, and you have Pontius Pilate, a Roman governor, both agreeing that Jesus Christ had done nothing deserving of death. Therefore I will punish him and release him. Now he was obliged to release to them at the feast one prisoner, but they cried out all together, saying, "Away with this man, and release for us Barabbas." He was one who had been thrown into prison for insurrection, made in the city, and murder. Pilate wanted to release Jesus, addressed them again, but they kept on calling out, saying, "Crucify, crucify him." And he said to them the third time, "Why, what evil has this man done? I have found in him no guilt demanding death. Therefore I will punish him and release him." But they were insistent with loud voices, asking that he be crucified, and their voices began to prevail. And Pilate pronounced sentence that the demand be granted. And he released the man they were asking for, who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, but he delivered Jesus to their will. John chapter 19, verses 6 through 15. So when the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, "Crucify, crucify." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I found no guilt in him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and by that law he ought to die, because he made himself out to be the Son of God." Therefore, when Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid, and he entered into the praetorium again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "Do you not speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you and have authority to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no authority over me unless it had been given you from above. For this reason, he who delivered me to you has the greater sin." As a result of this, Pilate made efforts to release him. But the Jews cried out, saying, "If you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar." Now, if you're wondering how the chief priests, the elders, could pressure the Roman governor Pontius Pilate into crucifying Jesus Christ, that is how they did it. First, there was a threat of or fear of a riot led by the chief priests and the elders. And second, they called into question Pontius Pilate's loyalty to Caesar. Verse 13. Therefore, when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was a day of preparation for the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. And he said to the Jews, Behold your king. So they cried out, Away with him, crucify him. Pilate said to them, Shall I crucify your king? The chief priests answered, We have no king but Caesar. Now in verse 15, the chief priest confesses his loyalty, not to the one true God in heaven, but to Julius Caesar Tiberius, the emperor of Rome at that time. And their treachery did not end there. In Matthew chapter 27, verses 41 through 43, they mocked Jesus Christ when he was on the cross. And in the same way, the chief priests also, along with the scribes and elders, were mocking him, saying, He saved others. He cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now, if he delights in him, for he said, I am the Son of God. And that treachery did not end there. In Matthew chapter 27, verses 62 through 66, the chief priests and the Pharisees called Jesus Christ a deceiver. Now on the next day, the day after preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered together with Pilate and said, Sir, we remember that when he was still alive, that deceiver said, After 3 days, I am to rise again. Therefore give orders for the grave to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise his disciples may come and steal him away and say to the people, He has risen from the dead. And the last deception will be worse than the first. Pilate said to them, You have a guard. Go, make it as secure as you know how. And they went and made the grave secure. And along with the guards, they set a seal on the stone. So the Roman guards at the tomb of Jesus Christ were put there at the request of the chief priests and the Pharisees. And their treachery did not end there. During the resurrection, those guards were frozen with fear. They were like dead men. Matthew chapter 28, verses 1 through 4. Now after the Sabbath, as it began to dawn for the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to look at the grave. And behold, a severe earthquake had occurred, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled away the stone and sat upon it. And his appearance was like lightning, and his clothing as white as snow. And the guards shook for fear of him, and became like dead men. Now some of those guards went back into the city to report what had happened, but they did not report it to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. They did not report it to some Roman officer. They reported all that had happened to the chief priest. Matthew chapter 28, verses 11 through 15. Now while they were on their way, some of the guards came to the city and reported to the chief priest all that had happened. And when they had assembled with the elders and consulted together, they gave a large sum of money to the soldiers and said, You ought to say, His disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. And if this should come to the governor's ears, we will win him over and keep you out of trouble. And they took the money and did as they had been instructed. And this story was widely spread among the Jews and is to this day. So the chief priests and the elders paid off the guards. They lied about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And they were telling that lie right up to the time the book of Matthew was written, and are to this day. And their treachery did not end there. After Jesus Christ was resurrected, he was traveling on the road to Emmaus, and he begins to travel with a couple of other people, but they don't recognize him. So let's read the conversation Jesus Christ has with those people. Luke chapter 24, verses 15 to 20. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself approached and began traveling with them, but their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. And he said to them, What are these words that you are exchanging with one another as you are walking? And they stood still, looking sad. One of them, named Cleopas, answered and said to him, Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem, and are unaware of the things which have happened here in these days? And he said to them, What things? And they said to him, the things about Jesus the Nazarene, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word, in the sight of God and all the people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to the sentence of death and crucified him. So how did the Jewish people go from believing Jesus Christ was a prophet, mighty in deed and word, in the sight of God and all the people, to believing Jesus Christ was a fake, an impostor, a deceiver? Well, the answer to that question is not at all complicated. The Jewish people listened to their leaders. The chief priests, the high priests, the Pharisees, the elders were the leaders and rulers of the Jewish people. And they told the Jewish people that Jesus Christ was a fake, an impostor, a deceiver. They lied about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, if you tell a lie long enough, if you tell a lie strong enough, people will begin to believe you. And eventually, they will not question what they're being told. So I encourage you to read and study the Bible from beginning to end and try to get a better understanding of God's word, the truth. The truth will not bind you. The truth will set you free. This is Bible Studies. The truth is about to be told.